60 days, and that to require the 3 public hearings. Where does the ordinance process actually stand today? What has been drafted, what hasn't, and what's the realistic timeline before it comes back for a vote?
I don't know the realistic timeline. One thing you have to always understand about the commission is that timelines they don't matter, they don't exist. So don't send yourself to a timeline when you go to the commission. That's not bad, right? But so we are in the process now of drafting an ordinance to address data centers. I want to address something that it has been said in public forums and in commission meetings that really is on our skin and nags at me, is that, you know, we might as well just get ready for these data centers because we can't afford it, right? It's just inevitable. We should just get ready for this because we can't afford it. It's just simply not true. And that's not the case in Augusta County. But when we're talking about ordinances, we have a draft ordinance that was presented to the commission. And I have great concern with the ordinance because what was drafted as a pretty large document that was supposed to have issues with it being, I think, over 30 pages or something like that. I don't care if it's 50 pages. If it has provisions to help communities, that's okay. But that document has then been dwindled down to like an 8-page document, probably something less than that. It was a pro-people, pro-community ordinance, and it was kind of gutted to become more of a pro-business ordinance. And I don't have anything against businesses and being pro-business, but in this situation where data centers are concerned, we have to be just as equally concerned about the impacts that these data centers will have on communities as we would on business, if not more, right? And so where we are right now is that the commission was able to extend the ordinance, extend the moratorium for 60 days. Throughout that 60-day process, the idea is that we're going to have at least 3 public information sessions at various community centers across the city. I know there's going to be additional community centers, additional sessions hosted by Commissioner Scott and other leaders across our community. But this is going to be the time where we have to get together as a community and be loud, right? I'm not advocating for us to be obnoxious, right? When I say be loud, but I mean be loud and communicate what your values are. And why do I say that? I say that because I represent East Augusta. And if you are familiar with East Augusta, around the I-20 or the 520 East area, you know we're surrounded by plants. We're surrounded by industry. And not only are we surrounded by industry, but the neighborhood has always been notorious for flooding, right? In 92 or 93, something along those lines, there was a great flood and folks were riding around in boats in East Augusta because the infrastructure couldn't handle the downpour because of how the neighborhood is set. But there's plants in the area. I don't know what's in that ground, but I do know a few miles up the road from East Augusta, Eastview is a neighborhood called Allen Homes that's contaminated because of waste that was placed in the ground and all these other things. If you were familiar with the neighborhood Hyde Park, right? Now this may be not as extreme as Hyde Park, but we just don't know right now. Hyde Park was a neighborhood where folks were dying of cancer, having respiratory issues, and the city had to relocate every person in that neighborhood, had to move the businesses, move the churches because of the damages that these industries cause to that neighborhood. So this is an opportunity for us to come together and decide what we want for any future data center in Augusta if the commission chooses to approve a data center. But I'm looking at making sure that happens in this ordinance is that we clearly define where a data center can be established. You shouldn't have to wrestle with the data center being in a residential neighborhood or next door to a neighborhood where folks are paying $400,000, $500,000 for a home, right? We should have clearly defined metrics as to how these industries are reporting the farmland that they're taking away from us. How are they reporting to their upper heads? We just don't know that information right now. But that is what the ordinance that we're currently drafting, that language should be added, and I believe that it is added. But in that 60-day process, you should be prepared to come to the table and share what your wants, your needs, and your desires are. Because I said it publicly, I've said it on the news, I'll say it here, that your voice should be the loudest voice in the room. It's easy to look at this as an economic development issue, but I'm looking at it as a people issue, as an environmental justice issue. Money is good at what cost, right? So that's why I employ you to do this. I guess plus days right now.
Wonderful. Ms. Bonitatibus, the same question, and let me ask this, what specific protections and requirements would you personally want to see into a final ordinance? And then what should residents watch for or show up for at the upcoming public meetings? Okay. Reverend Woodberry, you want to take us out there?
I would say, first of all, we have to stop these data centers from hiding behind these so-called proprietary and confidentiality shields, where they go into these secret meetings with our elected officials and then come out with non-disclosure agreements where they cannot have any discussion whatsoever with the people the constituents that they are supposed to serve. So first thing is, let's get rid of these non-disclosure agreements so that the community can be involved with conversations that are going on. Second thing that is that we need to put some environmental safeguards in place. So we know that a lot of these centers that they release noise. So one of the things that we asked about in Marion County were putting up sound barriers for the noise that they said they would not emit. But if you have ventilation systems for your center, then I'm pretty sure that frequency, which is what sound is made of, travels on the air that's leaving there. We really need to know how water and the PFAS that's going to be contained within the water, how is that going to be dispersed to make sure that it's safe for people, and putting into place some things like we asked about when the power goes down and they have to have a way of generating energy, and they usually use diesel engines, which we know are not good either for the air we breathe or climate. Why not do like the data center in New Jersey, the Ironbound facility where they use solar power generators? So we need to look at all of those things, but even more important are community benefits agreements, because there are not going to be a lot of jobs that are created. They're going to be using a lot of their own people in order to work in the center. And, you know, we hear things like, well, we're going to leave money in the county for the schools, for the roads. We'll give some money to the Boys and Girls Club, which is all good, but we get that over and over with industry, and it's not moving the needle when it comes to increasing the proficiency of our children in school, etc. So one of the things we talked about is looking at community benefits agreements that allow us to have after-school tutoring, remedial assistance for students, putting in place job training and ready-to-work program, having on top of that for people who don't want jobs necessarily but want to become entrepreneurs, business incubators, and have these places staffed by members of the community so that we know that there's going to be a long-term interest in making sure that these programs continue, because they're investing in the people who are their family members and live among them. So I think we have a long way to go. And also keeping in mind, last but not least, what has been said, there will be a bubble, and it will burst, because not only are the manufacturers of chips, but the people who, the companies that manufacture the materials for the transmission, units that are necessary. There's a shortage with the supply, chain. So we have to be careful that we don't set up another Plant Global or another VC Summer where the citizens, the residents, wind up paying for a center, a plant that is never completed. So those are some of the things I think we need to make sure we have in place before we talk about another data center coming to any community in Georgia, South Carolina, or anywhere in this country.
You can tell he's a preacher, right?
I am going to ask the panel to hold your questions, your answers succinctly.
And so Reverend Woodberry, you said something so important. The companies, the corporations are asking to sign non-disclosure agreements, but communities are not coming to the table to talk about community benefits agreements. What is happening is that corporations are saying, what I'm going to give to your community. And we're like, oh, okay, thank you, but we're not negotiating what that give is, what is our requirement, what is our ask. And so I want to come back to the hearings that are going to happen. And while we have the 3 hearings, and I want to surmise that maybe most of this room may be anti-data centers. I don't know, I didn't take the poll. But if you are, we have got to also have the balanced response, right? It's good to be against, but we also need to know why people are for. What does the corporation say? Do we bring them to the table in these hearings so that the community, I hope we're inviting everybody, Meta, Google, everybody to the table so we can have an informed community. Not just anti, but informed.
All right. Listen. Whoever wants to be at the table for this conversation should be at the table, and they have been invited to the table. And even at some of the hearings that have been held prior to now, you know, it's almost been like they don't want to talk transparently to the communities. And while I'm trying to keep an open mind about the entire concept of data centers coming into our communities, I get nervous when a citizen asks a question, but the developer or the business leader, or whatever we want to call the data center folks, is, you know, they're reading off of a paper or a prepared statement. And if your question doesn't align with the prepared statement, they're, so we're going to get our attorneys and get back to you. We have a scheduled meeting with the developer who wanted to come in to Augusta, went to the Eisenhower area. We started asking for members of the community to join that meeting because we want to make sure that it's a well-balanced conversation. Well, now that we're asking for community members to join the conversation, they have specific security parameters that they have to answer to that prohibits them from allowing too many people on campus at one time. But I'm also aware that we were asking for a different type of community member to come work with an issue. But we're asking for neighborhood presidents. We're asking for civic leaders to just come to the table to get information to take back to the people. So to answer your question, yes, these folks are at the table, and I am not suggesting that this becomes an us versus them conversation because that is us movement, right? But what I am suggesting is that if the community has questions about their quality of life and about their ability to be confident knowing that they're not going to have to deal with unintended consequences because they're government, that shouldn't be too much to ask you to come to the table to answer. And community benefits agreements are important, but we can't mandate a community benefits agreement, although I think that language should be added into the ordinance as well, right? So the point is, yes, they've been invited to the table, but we want to make sure that in that invitation that you guys are there as well. And maybe not everybody, but in the form of organizations that's doing work to inform people. And I think that's where the middle ground is missing, where we're asking for people to come, but now there's a security measure that you can't agree to that tells us something. Right? So that's what our reservation comes in with our
Senator
Table
Jones,
conversations.
I'm sorry, Senator Jones, how do you see the local process interacting with the state level standards? How do you see us synchronizing the local issue with the state level standards that are being established?
I mean, hearing that conversation, I kind of thought something. One of the things we're going to be doing next year, the bill that already exists, is SB 94, is we'll continue with that. SB 94, Senate Bill 94, is dealing with the Consumer Utility Council. And so the Consumer Utility Council actually existed before in Georgia, when we had the session back in 2010. We got rid of it because we were cutting everything. So why do I say that? We probably did, because I hear about what Commissioner Gordon saying about community buy-in. Potentially, what that utility council does for the ratepayers is that's an attorney who has the experience in this area. That's just kind of how it's structured. Not saying that's how the county has structured, but you can almost create a utility council or some kind of data center council. So therefore, you have a group that is responsible for kind of making these kind of conversations that represents the people. And that's what our SB 94 does as far as our consumer utility council, which we once had, where you actually have an entity that represents the people, because obviously everyone can't come to the Capitol to hear every single thing. And so therefore we have experts, somebody who's an expert in the area. And I think that's one way the counties could actually be on something similar. So also from the state perspective, we have to realize that the counties, we want the counties to have a lot of autonomy too. So for instance, we're talking about community benefits package. So for instance, in Effingham County, they're going to get open AI data center. So Effingham County is saying that they're open AI, and I'm not in Effingham County, so I don't know the truth or lack of truth to this, but they're going to have a community benefits package of $8 million for all sorts of different services. That's what they've created. And so it becomes somewhat complicated from a state perspective for us to some extent to say, no, what we're going to do is going to try to now mandate all these different contracts. We're going to mandate how these counties operate on this. Because if that's correct for Effingham County, this open AI data center will be its largest taxpayer. If that's correct, then it becomes somewhat problematic for the state to say, well, we're going to change all that. Even though we're not going that way for Effingham County as it is. We have that expansion, we fully run public schools. So I understand why Effingham County needs $18. So that's kind of like a balance act that we have to do. But I think that when I'm hearing about counties saying, hey, how can we get everybody involved? From our perspective, from the state perspective, what we decided is let's go back to the Consumer Utility Council. And the county says they always have the same kind of representative. So all your neighborhood presidents can have that kind of representative as their kind of talking point. Say, okay, this is the person represents, and it's county sponsored. So when you have a Consumer Utility Council, it's state sponsored. So it is the imprint of the state. This is not just some random person, random council. It's the imprint of the state saying this is state sponsored, and so therefore we have to deal with that. With the Consumer Utility Council similar, it's state sponsored, therefore we have to deal with the Consumer Utility Council. They're state sponsored, they will run the PSC and say, this is what's best for the ratepayers, this is what's best for the consumers. Something similar, I think, we set up also in the county, because I think we just have to deal with it because it's county sponsored.
Thank you. Ms. Abid, what should residents be pressing for? What should we press for when we attend Commissioner Jordan's hearings? And Commissioner
Francine.
Here.
Transparency first and foremost. There's so much secrecy behind a lot of these contracts and a lot of these deals. When we're talking about like Effingham County and the 100+ megawatt data center builds in particular, Georgia Power is able to offer like bespoke deals to these data centers, and the PSC staff has to determine whether or not they want to disagree or intervene in that process at all. And so there's so much secrecy there that folks don't get access to, which I consider utility council can certainly help with, but people just don't know what's coming because there's so much black marketing on all of the things, right? You can't, how do you defend your community against something you don't know what's happening? So transparency, I think, is the number one thing.
Where would we get, so where should we as the community seek this information? If it's secrecy from the corporations, then where do we uncover that? Where do we find that out? Where do we inform our residents?
So, I mean, that's a difficult question. There's probably allusions to some of this information in a variety of sources. I would say that you have to ask your public service commissioners and the PSC staff for
pause right there. When you said the contracts are secret, the contracts between who and who are secret?
The contracts between, Georgia Power and these data centers. So,
Utility.
yes.
The utility and the corporation.
So these are secret, I don't get access to this, I have no idea what's in them. And so you're asking me how do you uncover it, that's a question I'm still learning an answer to myself. But asking the PSC and the PSC staff for increased transparency and for them to act in our best interest, is something that I think communities need to do.
So I want to come back to our elected officials. Just to that point, if the community, if the commission is going to approve, not approve it, can that be an addition? That there are no secret contracts, that is transparency? Can that be legislated in? We legislate everything else in.
I know, they legislate
I don't
everything.
have a problem with that. You know, I think if we're able to put that in the ordinance, yeah, let's do it. Let's make a requirement that the details are put on the table in the first place. That is exactly why we're in the position we're in now with data center in Richland County, is because there was a lack of transparency. But I also understand is that in 2023, the commission attempted to draft and pass an environmental justice ordinance. We had four major stakeholders at the table, and all of them decided that they were against this environmental justice ordinance because it presents us as being anti-business. And so I think that one of the biggest things you have to do is, number one, hold your elected officials accountable to serving your interests. And number two, we have to make sure that we know what we can do as elected officials and we better serve you. So yes, if we're able to do that, we don't have a problem, we supporting it. But I think it also should go back to reading that environmental justice ordinance from 3 years ago as well.
And it goes back to the bill that I talked about, which is SB 34, where we want to put in the contract and guarantee how the contract should be structured. Now, we have to be careful about how far we actually take that, and what's going to be the will of the general assembly actually pass. That's number one thing about any legislation, what can actually pass. If we actually do something like SB 34, where we say, look, these things have been within contracts on a great areas of concern, that's not necessarily been done with it. So for us to actually get that far, and get it actually be sensitive on some level, is beyond what most people actually think would happen. And then it goes back to what we were talking about with the utility council, because you do have that balancing act that exists, and so therefore, that's why you have that kind of imprint, you have a person who basically, or person, it doesn't have to be one person, but if you have that kind of entity that represents the county, represents the state, then they can be more privy to the private contracts, because they can say, look, this, we believe, based on what our consumers say, because I represent consumers, we believe that this contract will be adequate, because it's going to be difficult necessarily. Obviously, as I said, it's balancing act. Obviously, no matter what business it is, going to be like, wait a minute, we don't want to say get all involved in our contracts like this. But you have another actor that's at the table, even though they represent the state or the county, who also says, look, I'm here for the consumers, and this is our input into this. And they actually have state buy-in because they're state entity or county entity, because they now you have someone there who's now privy to all of this information, which is not necessarily coming out. So I think that's one way to kind of balance it out. And that's the question that we always face in the general assembly. I mean, we're still Georgia. So whether I want to go further, what I try to do is what's the actual tax. What can we get new legislation to help everybody? And even though it's the first step or a second step, they're not the total steps. But what can we do to actually start this process? And I think that those pieces of legislation start the process in a very good way. We can just get approved. But I also do believe that counties ought to really think about that. Have a representative there that represents the community who's kind of, I mean, you get an expert in the fields now. It can't just be anybody. You put somebody who understands the process, understands contracts, also understands environment, also understands data centers, et cetera, and they kind of represent people to a great extent.
So, Mr. Bonitatibus, if we're writing in our community an ordinance, we're having input for fair and enforceable agreement between the community and the company. What should the company be expected to pay for? And let me pause there. Rumor has it that in the county over, the data center has offered that community to eliminate property taxes. That's a very seductive ask. That's a very seductive, inviting, engaging exchange. And we may not ask any questions past, my taxes getting eliminated, come on in. So how do, and it puts a squeeze on Augusta, right? As we're trying to grow our community, increase the presence in our community, increase development in our community. Someone one county over says we don't do taxes, it makes it very attractive. How do we combat that?
Well, I think first and foremost, the economic development is at the forefront of all of that. I'm surprised we haven't brought it up yet, but the IDA is the person, there is somebody whose job it is to solicit these companies to come to town to give them tax breaks and bonds, to make the agreements, like giving them the 15-year abatement in Effingham, for example. Just real quickly on Effingham, that's 1,400 acres. Facility surrounded by warehouses on a major evacuation route, and that is one of the things that I think across the board with ordinances is incredibly important, is stormwater. You're talking about a massive amount of concrete, and if that goes wrong, and it does, they built to a 100-year event. South Carolina's having 500-year events. This thing does not like me. 500-year events on a regular basis. So we're not building and requiring state standards for stormwater that are effective when you have that much concrete. But the companies, they need to be, there's a bunch of things. I mean, on the first and foremost, we have to stop the tax breaks. We keep talking about what the companies are paying for, and currently if you build in Georgia, the only thing you're paying for is the security, I think, or the safety equipment you're buying for your workers. Everything else is a tax break, right? So I'm not entirely sure why we say that they're paying. Somebody tell me that I'm wrong, but that's on the state tax, that is still a law. South Carolina and Georgia, between the two of them, there are about 27 different data center legislations last year. Do you know how many passed? That many. That was very strategic. It happened in most states, right? So that is something to watch for. You're gonna see a whole bunch of legislation because it's easy to confuse legislators when you have a whole bunch of them. I'm pretty sure that's what happened last year. But the,
Well, not ours.
not ours.
Not ours.
Nobody was confused at all.
Yeah.
But I think there's a couple of things the companies need to pay for and also talk about. So we have 17 currently in the 10,000 square mile watershed, or 35 counties of the Savannah River that are currently on the books, right? We already talked about the energy. Energy by far is the largest water user in the state. Right now today, in Banks County, they have less than fire suppression in their water line. Franklin County is the same thing. Franklin County earlier this year, they get their water from Carnesville, this is just north of us, and the uranium in it was too high at the local splash pad, so they had to switch to Livonia's water, and then the lead jumped up, right? So these are communities that do not have the infrastructure or the water needs currently in place out of the river. Then we go down to Hampton County. I've got 90 wells right now, deep water wells that are not flowing. These people do not have access to water. On the other side, Effingham just got a new $500 million intake to pull in to feed Hyundai and to feed the new data center and the rest of their growth. So from that big perspective, the companies and the communities that are allowing them to come in need to understand and make everybody pay and negotiate with the people upstream, downstream. Because if you get water wrong, you get everything wrong. And that is for real in Savannah and Hilton Head and Bluffton area, right? They don't have much aquifer, it's already salty, they're drinking more out of the river. So that's, and then in terms of dealing with the community, I'll be honest with you, don't use the word community benefits agreements. It's a bad tag for industry and nobody's gonna listen to you. So if you actually wanna make real substantive change, come up with a different term, right? So what? If people don't like environmentalists, become a conservationist, whatever you need to do. But my point is that that's a tag word, so you guys need to recognize that right now. But there do need to be conversations with these companies and chemical companies and Solvay and everybody else that wants to come in that truly looks at how are you going to ensure that the neighborhood is not negatively affected, And how are you going to continue the conversation so that if a problem arises, you are able to know that it happens and deal with it? So that, I think above all else, is there has to be some kind of feedback loop. So that if these companies are allowed to come in, one, they shouldn't be getting huge tax breaks if they're gonna cover your property taxes. And that needs to be very upfront what that agreement looks like. There needs to be a true response of like what's happening with the resources. And how is it you think you have this much water or electricity available? And then the last one is a timeline. So we're talking right now on the books, I think it's actually close to 30 gigawatts of power that all of these data centers say that they need in Georgia. So that's a 15, 20-year build out. So my question is, which one of you is first? Because every single one of you is gonna take every tree and all of the stuff off of it. You're gonna sell your trees and you're gonna leave red clay like you did in 2008. When developers walked away, when the crash happened, and my river and creeks filled with red clay everywhere. We had flooding everywhere because developers went bankrupt and just left the red clay and the banks didn't pay for it. So that and what happens when you close the door, that's the last one I'll hand it, I'm sorry. But the other one that scares me is these warehouses are not even being built strong enough, most of them, to hold solar. So these are lock and build things. The amount of generators and fuel that have to be kept on site, and the heavy metals and a lot of the equipment. If you, for Effingham, they came in as right in their ordinances. They don't have an ordinance, right? So this is they came in as a right within their rules, where their rules currently allow industries to shut the door and they're still left in place. Well, I'll tell you, 2 years ago in Barnwell, we had a kid that showed up at the school with a radiation detection monitor out of one of the old facilities that was shut and not properly remediated. What happens if these facilities are allowed to just walk away? We don't have to let them do that, it has to be in the rules, but they need to make sure they're paying for that. And it's very easy for a company to get out of that because they just sell to the next person and next person and divest. So that needs to be something we make sure. So if you're gonna bring all this stuff in, how are you taking it back out when you're done?
We're coming to the close, and if you have questions, we're going to invite you to ask a question. Not a statement, not a speech, a question. Amen? All right. Senator Jones, here's my question for you also. What protections should be established statewide before we negotiate county to county?
I think one of those questions would be the tax exemption, how we can kind of control that. I think that's one of the things we can concentrate on statewide, because how far those actually go. We actually have legislation out there, we talked about it, that actually eliminate that for future projects, and that was one of the ones that I talked about, which is one of the ones that are futures. And I do want to clarify, because I have to, for the legitimacy of the system, it's not confusing necessarily. So there were 27 bills, but anyone can draft legislation. So what you have to look at is who's actually doing the draft. And so, yes, to some extent, but what you look at, all of the bills that I named, one by two by finance chair, another by rules chair. Those are the ones that we're going to be concentrating on in the Senate. Obviously, when a member comes and says, I'm going to draft a data center bill, 9% off. Those are not the ones who are going to be concentrating. We know the ones who are going to be concentrating on from the leadership perspective. So blame me necessarily from the leader of the Senate, when the leaders of the Senate, but it's not necessarily purposeful confusion. We can't stop them from dropping whatever they want. We got to drop all kinds of stuff on data centers. This is a big issue, but it's only a few that's something we are actually going to be concentrating on. They may not know that sometimes, but it's only a few that we're going to concentrate on. And so these are three, it's about two others too. But I do think the tax exemption is one big area that we can look at, and that did have bipartisan support. And that's going to be the key thing, because no matter, most likely what I will happen next year is you have the Democratic governor, House, but the Senate will probably still be a little bit Republican. So we're all going to still have to work together about what we can pass legislation. So we do, but we want to get some of these things passed. But I do think that aspect of tax exemptions is huge, because we lost $1.5 billion last year in tax exemption. That's quite a bit. $500 million just in 2025 alone. So we have to figure out a way to kind of curtail that as possible, because the theory basically is they were going to need tax exemption, kind of money that they wanted to pay. So I think, and there was a bill to do that, and now they actually did. So the will is there in the Senate, always in the Senate, would be a good reason house, et cetera. So I think that that's a possibility. So when I'm saying these are things that actually got traction. We just couldn't get all the way across.
Ms. Abid, Ms. Baker, Reverend Woodberry. In terms of the community attending the meetings, and I want to just kind of focus and land there and end there. Ms. Bonitatibus said, don't use community benefits agreement. And I started laughing and said, we are people masterful at code switching. We were told not to say DEI, we figured it out. We were told not to say environmental justice, we figured it out. And so, what we can and cannot say is not the determining factor on us moving forward. But what should be one question from you that the community should come to the town hall meetings and ask? One question that would
Get some movement, traction, and information to the community.
Well, I guess the one that's been at like the forefront of my mind, we've been talking a lot about water today. So what are like the questions at the forefront of my mind at least has been, do we have enough water for this? And does our wastewater system have the infrastructure to support some of this? Because I've been thinking a lot recently, especially talking about like the PFAS, the closed loop cooling situation that we saw out in Cheyenne, where they were flushing the cooling system and a rare bacteria ended up in the wastewater system. And it disrupted the local wastewater system. You don't want that to happen, because then that could eventually affect the community as well. I'm not the water expert, that's Tonya in the room. But that's the thing that's on the forefront of my mind today.
So the question that I think people should ask is, what is the cost beyond the cost? And who's gonna pay the cost? That's what I would have people ask.
And open that up. What's the cost beyond the cost? What does that mean? I wanna ask that question when I go to the town hall, but I don't know what that means. I wanna leave here informed and educated. What does
So
that
for
mean?
me, that answer is, what are the health effects that are going to happen? What is the damage to the environment that's going to happen? What is the damage to infrastructure that's going to happen? Because we understand that climate change is real. Are we inviting more natural disasters to occur? Are we not going to be able to trust our drinking water? All of those different things. Those are the costs beyond the costs.
Thank you.
I will also add one other thing
Yes.
that I think is also important. You all are here like talking to one another and dreaming about other things that you could want for your community as well. So that's also an important question that I always like to encourage individuals to ask when they go to the commissioner meetings. Is that if you know, if your community is feeling like a data center is not for you, then we can start asking the questions of what other industries or other public utilities that we could want to bring in instead. And that instead opens up a conversation with, no, like we're not wanting to inhibit the growth of our community because we don't want a data center that we know little about. But let's open up the conversation about what other things we can do in order to better our community.
Well, first of all, if saying CDA made the developer go away, we'll keep saying it. But the main thing that we heard from the community was water, because we're into our third year in South Carolina of having a drought advisory in place. So that was what people were concerned about the most, was the water that would be used, what would happen, when the water was dispersed from the so-called closed loop system, which would never have to disperse water. And then after that would come concern about the air quality from the diesel engines, and last but not least, any noise, especially since String, which was the company, was going to build not far away from a school. So it was those were the three main things, in addition to costs. Who was going to pay for the generation of the electricity?
Would you help me thank our panelists for this wonderful, informative conversation? Are there any burning questions in the audience?
they've done a health, I guess, a comparison analysis to not have another Hyde Park or East Boundary, because I ate some of that clay downtown when I was a little girl. It was red clay, but I'm healthy, and you know, and I thank God. But have they done that to ensure that, you know, everything is safe
On the ground.
for the, you know, the ground, children play,
An
children.
environmental impact study. It's called an environmental impact study, to study what's the impact. And so that hasn't been done, there's a no. But I think the fact that you're raising it raises the issue that it should be done.
We've
been asking. It must be done before any, community building. Thank you, great question. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I don't know if I need a microphone.
I don't think you do.
Okay. First of all, thank you, panel, so much for taking time this Saturday to be here. I have a question for the fabulous Reverend, the Riverkeeper, and the Senator. So I'll start from left to right. Ms. B, thank you for all that you do. I wanted to ask you, when you were talking about basically the surety bond, right? When you were saying, what are we doing to draw everything down? Our planning commission at that county you were talking about that's promising candy and property taxes, they said in November of 2025, right? This was after they had already signed in a data center. They developed an ordinance, and in their statements in the ordinance, they said that they would, that the data center was responsible for bringing everything. If they stopped operating, then they would have to bring it down to the ground. What I want to know is, who do I ask what the definitions are for not operating anymore? Does that mean they can just leave the lights on and it's still operating? And who do I ask that question to? Do I ask my commissioners? Do I ask the planning department? Do I ask the data center themselves? So that's one question. Should I just fire all my questions?
No, just pause
Yeah,
right there.
just
We got
one.
your question, and I don't know if we're gonna get to all three of your questions, to be fair.
Columbia County.
You're talking about Columbia County. Well, I think, first and foremost, that's exactly the question. So there's kind of two. One is that everybody needs to be asking what happens if all the promises don't hold true. It's called adaptive management. What is the adaptive management procedures that are put in place so that if all this stuff you say is gonna happen doesn't happen? What's the mechanism there? So that's very, very important. The way the Columbia County legislation is written, you can keep a light on and they don't have to clean up. So you're right. That is the detail, and that's why you need to make sure you have good lawyers. But it is written in a way that you barely keep the lights on. As long as there's something going, they don't have to do the big cleanup. I think the only way that's gonna get fixed is if the community is much more clear about what they expect from their elected officials and the others that are allowing this stuff to come in, because that is very strategic, but also needs to be fixed. The other is there should absolutely be an emphasis on cleaning up. We are sitting in a neighborhood that has contaminated land. We're sitting right down the street from a lot of contaminated land. Columbia Nitrogen Road already has major gas lines, already has major transmission lines, and could use a massive amount of cleanup. So that's the other thing, is these guys need to stop cutting raw trees and actually focus and do some meaningful good in the community by locating in places where they're actually doing remediation.
And that remediation and cleanup opens the opportunity for major job training in our
I'll be so
county.
fast.
One quick,
You got it.
is it quick?
You got
Let me see.
it. Senator. So none of those passed, right? SB 34, 410, and 94, correct? I know why, but can you tell the room why SB 34 didn't pass, and then why didn't 410 and 94? And what can we do as citizens when we're using the tools of democracy to draft legislation when it's being sabotaged from leadership above?
They passed the Senate. 94 was able to pass the Senate, thank you. Let me make sure I get my numbers right here. So 410 actually passed the Senate. That's one by tax exemption. That actually passed the Senate, yeah, going further. 34, a version of 34 did pass, but it wasn't the version that we wanted, which would actually mandate the contracts basically say the ratepayers won't go through. This is more of a milquetoast version, so that one actually did pass. But we don't like that version, so that's not good. So that's not the real version. So obviously, all sorts of groups get involved in these arguments. I think to some extent, because it was very close votes. It's just, some people feel compelled not to do anything necessarily. Some people want to do more, and we just have to continue to make sure we get votes out there. I think the votes can be gotten, quite frankly. I think one thing maybe allude to, like Georgia, we fought Georgia Power all session long, talking about Democratic caucus. But you know what that did? It actually brought them to the table. We actually had great conversations with them after the session. But we fought them all session long, you know, and so they were really mad at us. But that actually brought them to the table. So actually fighting actually helps you. If you do it in a good way, if you do it in a reasonable way, a logical way, and one that doesn't necessarily just try to throw bombs at people, I always say that necessarily don't try to throw bombs, it actually brought them to the table. We actually have a better conversation with them now than we ever had before, quite frankly. And I think we can get some more traction on some of these things. And that's being positive, right? But I do know for a fact that where it started off at the beginning of the session, kind of like, we need to deal with you guys. They said, you know what, we actually do need to deal with you guys. So we're in a much better position.
Thank you. And this will be our last question, Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Ms. Tonya. I know we've known you for a while. I've been serving and working in the utilities and water. And I'm very concerned about the water. We're talking about, you and I talked about it, right? 18 million gallons a day we want to use. That's not the biggest issue that we use to the water pipe. The problem is the contamination and what kind of chemicals that we're going to use, and then it bursts out. Remember, this is what we call a hydraulical cycle. The same amount of water that we use in the end days, the same amount of water we use today. So when it transfers the water and starts doing chemical, it goes back into the air, it goes back into the land, it goes back to the contamination, it finds its way back into the Savannah River. So then we got to look when we start doing the testing on the Savannah River, is how are we creating a bigger nightmare than we created before when we started doing this? And we look at, sorry about that. Then we look at, my other issue is this, the economic issue that we create. How many jobs it's going to create, and it's worth putting this there versus building other communities and neighborhoods that you get more of an economic resource than a temporary situation that they think is going to solve.
Okay, thank you.
That was not a question.
I was trying to pull a question out of that. Thank you all so much. And before we end, allow me to acknowledge some folks in the room, beginning with our mayor-elect, Stephen Kendrick, if you would kindly stand. Thank you, kind sir. You want to make a statement in the room today? I'm his pastor too, so.
Yes, ma'am. And that's the only reason I took this microphone. No, I did. It was good to hear the information. It's good to hear the concern. It's good to hear that the community is paying attention to what's going on. One of the reasons she asked me to do this probably is because she's heard and we've had several discussions about the issue. I think that one approaches this from a different place, a different space as to what they're concerned about. We'll give one thing, and it's probably what she's mentioning. I think we also need to consider, besides environmental justice, economic justice as well. How many people here are actually live in Augusta, Georgia? That is Augusta. Okay, so about half. For those who live in Augusta, we do recognize that we have some economic issues that are just as significant as what we are proposing or what could be the environmental issues that have occurred. When we look at what has happened, and one of the things she referenced was, I told the story of the new center in Columbia County that has been passed. It's been concluded perhaps that it could wipe out property taxes potentially in Columbia County. And it possibly could. We're speculating. We're speculating here. But what we need to remember is something like that happens, the competitiveness of the county where you live, the cost that you're saving by perhaps some of the things we're talking about, immediately don't exist anymore, because now all of a sudden the county next door is much, much more attractive to live in. That means our property values here go down.
Yeah.
So when 10% of the people in Augusta leave and move next door, that means there's a glut of properties available now. I'll just ask Commissioner in case anybody forgot. And when those properties are on the market, the very costs we still have to pay here in Augusta have to be paid. But we don't have as many people to pay it anymore because the property values aren't the same. And our income goes down. So we need balance. We need to force these companies to do exactly the things you're talking about. We need to be very mindful of all the issues we've talked about today. And I believe with the type of people we have involved today, all those things will get addressed. But we must not remember we live in a place that has some serious economic issues that it has to address. And I, for one, whose home bought 7 years ago has doubled in value and my taxes have doubled in that time, don't look forward to paying anymore. And so with that in mind, we have to make sure we find ways so that Augusta, Georgia does not miss out potentially on opportunities that others around us are potentially taking advantage of if we could do it in a meaningful way. I think that's possible. There's lots of rural land in our community that are perhaps in further away places. There's ways to put protections in. There's agencies involved. There's a community that's involved. But I think we have to look at all of that because at some point, while we're doing, and remember what we're doing today here, we're speculating in all regards. We're talking about what could happen, and I'm very encouraged by some of the things and some of the things that have been spoken of that we're going to ask companies to do. That's important. But we also have to ask ourselves, in this community, do we want to still live in a place where people choose to live here and not in the outskirts around us, so that those of us who choose to make Augusta our home and choose to make this their place continue to have the type of place they want to live in, that we can pay for the roads, that we can pay for the police protection, that we can pay for all the things we need to do. And so we're going to go on this exercise over the next several months. We're all going to continue to talk about it. I don't have the luxury of just accepting the information I hear today, because most of you, I will say most of you, because nowadays I hear everybody voted for me, so I guess I got everybody. I have the luxury of just accepting what I hear today only. I have to hear the other parts so that we can make Augusta attractive and competitive and can grow and can afford the things we need to afford. Because I want my grandkids to come back and live in Augusta. Because right now they don't choose to. And that opportunity only happens if we become a community that is growing, that is thoughtful, that is putting the right things in place. So I think we're off to a good start. I think we need to continue these conversations. And much as Pastor said, and as Commissioner Johnson said, we have to be even more engaging to get what I don't like calling it the other side, but bringing everyone to the table to hear what their plans are, to hear what they're going to do, to hear their investment in Augusta. That's the word that hasn't been used today. Investing in Augusta. Because I'm not going anywhere. I'm staying here with my house that's overpriced, and I'm staying here with everything that goes with it. And we've got to find a way to make sure everyone in the room chooses to make Augusta their place to live.
Thank you. Let's thank our mayor. Thank you all so very much, and we're going to transition to the second portion. We're going to invite you to take a short break, and please help yourself to the refreshments. Allow me to thank our panelists, the Honorable Senator Harold